You see how it orbits. That celestial sphere will rotate once every 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds, which is sidereal time. And the sun you see there on the left, obviously I showed only as a profile of a half of a sphere, because that's the true shape of the sun. Once again, nature tricks the eye and gives you the illusion from Earth's vantage point that the sun is a ball. You think that it's a rotating ball because you see sunspots traversing across it, but that's just an illusion. It's not true. There's even a difference in the velocity of the sunspots going across the equator versus going across the so-called poles of the sun, which is what they call a differential rotation. And that's one of the reasons why they have to conclude that it's a gaseous ball of hydrogen. And it's not a gaseous ball of hydrogen. It's most likely made out of iron, but hydrogen gas is being emitted from the photosphere of the sun, which is picked up in stellar spectroscopy with their emission lines. And it shows that hydrogen is one of the main elements, but it doesn't constitute the actual physical material that the sun is made out of. It's not a gaseous ball. It's actually a hard object in the sky, and it's being powered from behind electromagnetically by collimated magnetic rays of light emanating from the top of the octahedron. It's a circuit. It's a connected circuit, as I mentioned before in previous videos, where that light is emanating out of the front of the sun. It's curving around. It's actually creating this kind of onion-like shape, and then it actually splays out. It's splaying out against the glass. It's behind at least 3 levels of glass. We have the glass that surrounds the sun and the planets. That's that glass that you see in between the other glass, the moon, the glass that surrounds the moon. And then there's a glass outside of this picture frame, which is at 100 kilometers high. So the actual ground in this animation is out of frame, meaning that there's more Earth to it. So, but in order to get a good close-up on the celestial sphere, I had to zoom in closer so we would crop out the actual glass sky and the actual concavity of the Earth. But you see it in the background anyway. But that's what it is. We have a complete circuit, a complete electromagnetic circuit emanating from the central octahedron. Now, I mentioned before that the octahedron is evident, and it can't be picked up with Canadian meteor orbit radar, with radar coming from New Zealand or Argentina as well. They're all picking up this radar, this octahedral formation, and they're saying it's where sporadic meteorites are originating from. However, that's not what it really is. We really have an octahedral structure in the center of the Earth. We can also understand that there's 4 equatorial equilibrium points at 90 degrees to each other at the equators in the oceans of the Earth, 90 degrees apart. If you were to take that central octahedron, just play it again there. If you were to take that central octahedron and enlarge it, when you are aligned with the equatorial equilibrium points, the base of that octahedron, in other words, the corners of the base of the octahedron, hitting those equatorial equilibrium points, you would see, as I explained in a previous video, that the continental formations fit very snugly in each of the quadrants, the triangular quadrants of the octahedron. We have South America fitting perfectly in the center of one of the triangular quadrants of the southern part of the octahedron. We have the southern part of Africa fitting nicely as well. We have Australia fitting nicely. And so that's a good indication too that there's a central octahedron. And the way I understood it originally was reading Job 38 and realizing that these are the foundations of the Earth. Foundations of the Earth are actually up in heaven. They're not below the ground. The foundations of the Earth being pyramidal in shape. If you read Job 38, it talks about laying it with measures, laying the cornerstone thereof, where the foundations there are fastened. And so it's understanding that this octahedral resonant absorptive antenna is sucking in the energy, the light, sucking in the electrons, and curving the light. There's magnetic resonance. There's a dielectric inertial plane. That's why objects on the ground actually weigh slightly less toward the equator. It's not because there's a rotation into the Earth. It's actually because the dielectric inertial plane is actually slightly, very minutely, causing objects to weigh a little bit less, almost like it's a relief in the etheric pressure. So there's less wind at the equator. We call that the intertropic convergence zone, or the doldrums. It's also interesting, it's mentioned in Scripture in the book of Revelation, where there's metaphorically 4 angels at the 4 corners of heaven, holding back the 4 winds of heaven. If you understand, at the equator, winds are very mild. And so that's another indication that there's an octahedral formation, a magnetic, levitating octahedral formation that's actually calming down the winds in the equatorial zone, in the intertropical zone of the Earth, the convergence zone. So that's another good reason why there's an octahedron in there. Also understanding that magnetite, the most magnetic mineral in all the world, its base crystal habit, its base crystal shape is octahedral in structure. Also understanding crystal field theory. I mentioned before, I made a video about crystal field theory. Crystal field theory, you have your 3 cardinal axes. You got your X, your Y, and your Z, right?
Yeah.
The 3 axes, they form the third dimension, right? And so your base formation, your base structure, your base platonic solid is an octahedron, as you got those 3 axes intersecting it and creating the 6 corners. And so in crystal field theory, they call these 6 corners ligands, and they're negatively charged. And these negatively charged ligands are converging toward the center. And the center is positively charged. And so when they converge, they expand and they create a sphere, a bubble. And that bubble enlarges on itself and it surrounds the octahedron. So that's why we have a spherical celestial sphere. That's why we have a spherical Earth. That's why we have spherical concentric glass bubbles in between. It all has to do with the foundations of the Earth, the octahedral crystal field foundations of the Earth. That's why there is an octahedron in the center. And so on the northern side of that octahedron, we have the illuminated side, and then the southern side is the darkened side. So we have light and dark. We have a separation there as well, you know. Scripture talks about that too. There's a separation between day and night in the Earth as well. So it's the power of duality as well working. And so on the northern side, the top, we have the apex there. That's the eye of the pyramid. That's a physical structure. That's not just this Illuminati ambiguous concept. They're deriving their symbolism from an actual physical structure because they understand that it is the object of power. That is the source of power, the source of light. The eye at the top of the pyramid is a real place inside heaven. And so they have this knowledge of it. It's really there. Scripture says that the sons of God shouted for joy when the cornerstone was laid, when that apex was laid on top, when the foundations of the earth were built. The sons of God. It also says that the sons of God are the Nephilim, or the fallen angels. So they imparted knowledge about the earth, about the shape of the earth. This is knowledge. Who can make straight that which God has made
Crooked
or curved? It's the same meaning. So we have this interesting, exquisite display of how things really work it's actually rather simple to understand as well, compared to a vast, wide, endless universe which has no form, which has no meaning, which has no structure, which has no continuity. It has no reason. But here we have reason. We have a foundational structure. We can apply logic and reason to it, and we can understand that light does definitely bend. Light bends. Light self-bends. It's even been proven by physicists. Light beams can actually bend. There was a study that was put out by,
I think, Wilhelm Martin, this geodesist, which showed that light curves up away from the Earth. So the curvature
yes,
of our sight, of our trajectory of sight, is curved more than the Earth. It's curved more than the actual curvature of the Earth.
that's true. Well, that's, yeah, not only Wilhelm Martin with theodolites, but any land surveyor with a theodolite is already measuring the upward bending of the light without even realizing it, because most of them are under the presupposition that the Earth is convex round, not understanding that light is actually bending upward. It's bending more than the curvature of the Earth. And so that's what they fail to understand. And that's why I told the land surveyor, Jesse Kozlowski, you need to show me your cardinal direction zenith angle test, because I have the sneaky suspicion there that you're going to get different deviations of that upward bending of the light depending on which direction you're facing. If you're facing toward that, if you're pointing that theodolite toward the sun, you're going to get a greater deviation of light. And so that right there should tell you something. That should raise a red flag about your presupposition there. But there has been studies, scientific studies, the physical review letters. One article is called Non-Diffracting Accelerating Wave Packets of Maxwell's Equations, where they talk about presenting non-diffracting spatial accelerating solutions of the Maxwell's equations, such beams accelerating in a circular trajectory, thus generalizing the concept of airy beams to the full domain of the wave equation. The beams exhibit shape-preserving bending, which can have sub-wavelength features. And the pointing vector of the main lobe displays a turn of more than 90 degrees. And so I know this is kind of techie, this one I was just reading here, but light self-bends. Light, there's interference patterns going on with light, especially these interference patterns going on emanating from the octahedron. And it's just creating this perfect bending of the light. If you look at the radiation patterns of a dipole antenna, like I explained in a previous video before, that's what's happening, where the light is bending more so than the actual curvature of the Earth. And you can even actually go out and measure the apparent curvature of the Earth, thinking that the light is actually straight and you're living on a convex ball, and get virtually the same calculated radius of the Earth, like that Cody guy did, because of the way that the light bends in both directions upward. And so it's going to give you the estimated virtually pretty close to the same radius if you were to think that light was straight and you were living on a convex ball. The horizon does descend as you get higher and higher in an airplane, in a high altitude air balloon. It will descend, because it doesn't mean that the Earth is bending down. It just means that the light is bending up more. And so that light at the edge of the horizon is going to bend up more, but it always bends back to the center. I made a video about that as well. So we have this working model. We have the moon. I showed the phases of the moon. Each day is, what do I have there? I got 10 frames per day. So 1 second is 3 days. But you see the moon is, if the moon was operating in real time, we'd have that moon rotating in the other direction. But as you see it here, it's rotating clockwise. And that's because I froze the sun. I froze the phase angle, or the right ascension. Now, when I talk about right ascension, I'm talking about east to west movement of celestial objects, like the sun, or like the planets, or like the moon. So the right ascension, as opposed to the declination is going to be the north-south angle. So you see at the bottom of the screen there, you see the declination of the sun. You see the declination of the moon. And you have the dates there. And then you have the little dial on the animation showing the actual numbers of degrees in which the angles decline. And so, hey, we have Jason in chat. Hey, Jason. And so you will understand in the summertime, at the summer solstice, June 21st, that sun is going to be way up high at its extremity at 23.4 something degrees. And what I explained in the description of this video is that if you take a spring, or you take a cylindrical orbit of something, and it has acceleration and deceleration at the extremities, you're going to get a slowing down and then a gradual acceleration as it goes the other way. And that matches perfectly of how the sun operates in the earth. And in Job 38, they call it the day spring. The day spring. Have you commanded the day spring? Right? There's a reason why we call it the day spring, because it acts like a spring. It's turned as clay to the seal. Clay to the seal. Well, in ancient times, they had clay seals that were cylindrical to seal documents with. So we have this analogy, this metaphor of the sun operating as a day spring and turning cylindrically like a clay seal. It matches perfectly if you understand what to look for, if your foundations are correct. And so we have the day spring, knowing its place, turned as clay to the seal. This is how we get the seasons. When the sun is at 0 degrees declination, that's at the equinox, the spring equinox and the fall equinox. March 20th, September 22nd. And then, of course, when the sun is at its lowest declination angle, minus 23.4, we get the winter solstice. So it's perfectly operating like a spring with acceleration and deceleration. And then, of course, we have that ecliptic. We see that diagonal line going, circumscribing the celestial sphere, with the planets all in the vicinity of the ecliptic. That's because there's a magnetic pole there. We see Venus, Mars, Mercury, Uranus, Neptune, they're all aligned to the ecliptic. See, we have structure here. We have reason. It's not this haphazard elliptical orbits in the heliocentric model that makes no sense. We have order. We have structure. These planets are behind glass, and in astronomy, you can actually still understand that they are behind glass by picking up chromatic aberration with reflector telescopes, as opposed to refractor telescopes. In the old days, they had refractor telescopes. Refractor telescopes were made with glass. They had glass lenses in the telescopes. The problem with those refractor telescopes is that they would exhibit chromatic aberration. There would be a shifting of the colors. You get the red fringing on one side, you get the violet fringing on the other side. And so they replaced most of those refractor telescopes with reflector telescopes. So instead of refracting through glass with the telescope, we have a mirror in the bottom of these reflector telescopes, which reflects the light, and so it's not going through this glass lens. However, this is one thing that modern astronomy fails to acknowledge, that if you just go on YouTube, you just find some amateur shots of planets, let's say Saturn or Jupiter or Mars, with reflector telescopes that are supposedly not going to pick up chromatic aberration. What do we see? We still see the fringing, the chromatic aberration fringing of the planets. That's one good indication that there's glass in the heavens, so they cannot eliminate all of the chromatic aberration with some of these reflector telescopes. And so, because these planets are behind glass, they're actually fooling your eye with refraction. they're giving you a greater range in apparent diameter, in apparent angular diameter. You're thinking that, wow, their apogee and their perigee, their apogee means that the farthest distance away from you, so it would appear the smallest, and the perigee means the closest distance to you, so it would appear the largest. They're thinking that by viewing their apogee and their perigee, and by measuring their angular diameter, which is measured in degrees, minutes, and seconds, they're thinking, well, yeah, there's got to be a great distance between the apogee and the perigee, not even understanding that these planets are actually behind a glass or a couple glass spheres that are playing tricks with the eye, that are increasing the refractive index. And so in all actuality, in real physical location, let's take, for instance, Mars. Mars will appear very big in the sky when it's going through its retrograde, when it's in opposition toward the sun, and yet it will appear very small when it's not. But because it's behind that glass, it's actually increasing the apparent size, increasing the apparent diameter of the planet, but it's really not going that far back or that far forward. It's all confined within that small space between the celestial sphere and that first glass. That first glass is also going to bulge the area in front of the sun, obviously, because heat will expand objects. And because the sun is emitting a lot of heat, not as much as they will tell you, obviously, but enough for that bulge to happen in front of the sun. And that is how we get star displacement. That is how we get what they think is gravitational lensing, which is inexplicable in their model anyway. They can't explain why it's happening. Gravitational lensing is a fictitious concept, all simply because they refuse to believe that there's real glass. There's real glass in the sky that is refracting objects, that is causing these little caustic anomalies to be displayed, because that central celestial sphere was damaged after the flood. There's water. There's water on the inside surface of that celestial sphere. And so during the time of the flood, when it says the windows of heaven were opened, they literally were opened because of those stars getting hot and clustering together and melting through. And the water came down, and I mentioned before that there was sand at the bottom of the celestial sea that also came down as well. That sand also fused and created these glass concentric spheres after the flood. So we have this going on here. We have when it healed back together, when the celestial sphere healed back together, it wasn't a nice, smooth, even surface no longer. It was damaged. It was bumpy. And so that bumpy surface is exhibited when we look at the galaxies, when we look at the nebula, when we look at quasars. There's going to be these caustic artifacts that are products of the bumpy glass surface and the light being diffracted, displaced, just like looking through a cut glass goblet, as Lawrence Krauss will say. It's not gravity causing mass to bend. That's not what it is. It's just simply looking through the stars through glass, looking at the stars through glass, just like Stone Sour talks about in their song. The stars are lying. We're looking at them through the glass. It's very simple to understand that. And so going back to that bulge that's in front of the sun, that bulge will, wherever the sun goes, wherever the sun traverses inside its own glass sphere there, it's going to bulge just the area in front of the sun. And so the area that gets bulged out, but the sun leaves, that area will go back to its normal state. And so that bulging is going to create the refraction that we pick up with star displacement when we look at eclipses. Because, when you see a total solar eclipse, that moon is eclipsing the sunlight, and you're able to pick up the background stars. Well, today we can do that also with chronographs. You just put a mask or a blocking filter in front of the sun, you can pick up the background stars, and you will see that there is a displacement there. meaning what I just told you. It's the actual glass with the refraction involved that is actually making those stars to appear to be in different positions. And they will call that gravitational lensing. But it's not gravitational lensing, because gravity is it's a fictitious force anyway. The real force is the ether force. The ether, the universal compression. It permeates the inside of the Earth. That's why we have pressure gradients. It's not because of gravity. They'll try to say, well, you're inside a container. Container doesn't have pressure gradients. Well, you're comparing a small little container to something that's macroscopically, exponentially much bigger. It's like comparing a poppy seed to a watermelon. You can't do that. You cannot compare the pressure gradient that we exhibit because of the ether to something much, much smaller on a microscopic level. So we have these pressure gradients because of the ether. The ether force is a centrifugal force. It's a divergent centrifugal ether force. It doesn't mean that the Earth is spinning. It's, like in the carnival. You ever go to the carnival ride, the gravitron, where you're stuck to the inside concave surface as it spins? Well, this is not what's happening. We're not spinning, but the ether force inside the Earth is spinning centrifugally. And so that force is compressing also, as well as an increase in density as the lower you get. So it's getting more dense. It gets even more dense when you go beneath the oceans. And so it's pulling us toward the ground. It's pushing us to the ground. And so this ether that's spinning has been detected. You can detect, see, the big experiment that everybody likes to talk about. Some people, the geocentrists, will say that this experiment proves that the Earth is motionless, or the heliocentrists will say, well, this proves that there's no ether. Well, that was the Michelson-Morley experiment that was done in Ohio a long time ago. But this interferometer that they had was in a basement. It was behind wood. And so there was obstructions to the ether. And what they will fail to tell you is that it wasn't a null result. It was actually slightly positive, meaning that there was a slight detectable ether in that experiment. But another problem with that is that Michelson and Morley actually claimed or stated that they were going to conduct at least 3 more experiments in addition to that initial one, and they never did. Why didn't they do that? Another thing, too, is there was a man named Dayton Miller. Dayton Miller was a contemporary of Michelson Morley. Dayton Miller built a much more sophisticated interferometer, much bigger, at a higher altitude. It wasn't in a basement locked up. The ether wasn't being obstructed, basically. And it was done under the most strict conditions. Everything was scrutinized. And he did detect there was an ether drift that was permeating the Earth. Hello. We have somebody here?
No, that was my mom.
Okay. Hello. So we have an ether. We have an ether present, and this ether explains everything that you think gravity explains, but the ether explains it better. They have what they call the Cavendish experiment, where they think that these 2 balls are being attracted by their masses because of gravity. Well, no, that's not the case. There's a universal compression force, an ether force. And these balls are simply obstructing the ether, and they are displacing the balls. There's also the Foucault pendulum. They think that the Foucault pendulum proves that there's a rotation to the Earth. Well, no. Back in the 1950s, there was a man named Maurice Elias who did extensive study with pendulums during eclipses. And he found very interesting anomalous movements to these pendulums while this total solar eclipse was happening. Meaning that what connection is there between a total solar eclipse and the rotation of the Earth? If there is a rotation of the Earth, it makes no sense. It's got to be another force that's perpetuating the pendulum. and that is the ether force. And so when the moon obstructed the sun, it changed the way that the ether was hitting the earth. There was a disruption, there was a disturbance within the ether when the eclipse happened. So that's another good indication too. Now I'll talk about bullet trajectories, right? In ballistics, they will think that because of the rotation of the earth, if you shoot a bullet toward the west, that bullet is going to sink more than if you shoot it toward the east. The bullet is going to rise more. Well, that's the way we have the ether force moving within the earth. It's going from east to west, and it's creating a depression toward the west. That's why it's easier to fly an airplane eastward than it is to fly it westward. You're going to get that rise. You're going to get that lift. It's going to be easy. You're going to spend less fuel going eastward than you are going westward. It's not because there's a rotation to the earth. It's because of that ether force. In all actuality, there was a YouTube video that this man took a rifle and he shot a bullet westward, and he recorded his results. And I think he shot at least 3 bullets. The target was about a mile away, and the bullets sank toward the west, anywhere from 8 inches to 12 inches lower than the target. However, when he shot it toward the east, it didn't rise 8 to 10 inches. It only rose like 3 inches, 4 inches. One bullet hit it right on. It was no rise at all. So if you were to think that it's because of the rotation of the earth, you would think that you get an equal rise eastward as you're sinking westward, but that's not the case. It's the ether force. It's moving within the earth. Ether is present. That's why we have these forces at play. So, going back to my model, you have any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So going back to my model, we see the sun emanating its light on the left, and it's going to hit the ground about halfway. It's going to illuminate one half of the earth at one time, but that curved light is going to begin to angle back up toward the center again, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to hit the back. It's going to hit the anti-solar point. There's going to be this funnel-shaped area that you see on the right there. That's where we're going to have a convergence zone. So that funnel-shaped area there's going to be a void area. See, so when the moon goes through that void area, it gets eclipsed. And that's where the heliocentrists will think that it's the shadow of the earth eclipsing the moon. However, when a lunar eclipse happens, it turns red. It turns kind of orangey, right? A dark orangey red, pretty much. They will tell you that it's because of the atmosphere of the earth that's casting the redness upon the moon from a 238,000 mile distance. Well, no, if you understand how light actually gets dispersed, you understand that out of all the colors of the spectrum, red is going to bend the least. It's going to refract the least. And so if this sunlight is hitting the earth and it's bending around back, and then it's causing this reddening, the reddening would be the color on the outside. You would think that you would get a violet color in that eclipse zone. You would think that the moon would be violet if it was eclipsed by the shadow of it 238,000 mile distant Earth. But that's not what we see. We see red because of the dispersion of the glass. So the glass is picking up this chromatic dispersion, and since red is bending the least, it's going to flood that area. But once it goes past that area and goes into the other glass sphere, that light converges and it gets brighter. There's a bright spot on the anti-solar region of the celestial sphere. So wherever the sun goes, the exact opposite side of the sun, there's a bright spot. That bright spot is called the Gegenschein. It has a name for it. It's identifiable. It's very faint, but you can still pick it up in the night skies if you're at a very high altitude. And so this Gegenschein is a telltale sign that we have this convergence of light. And the heliocentric answer is that, well, it's probably due to planetary dust, interplanetary dust. Problem with that is that they can't pick up any Gegenscheins on other planets, on Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Here. No, just Earth has the Gegenschein. Interesting. Makes much more sense to understand. It is the way I explain it there, where we have this nonlinear surge of illumination happening at the antisolar region. There's an effect called oppositional surge, where they will observe the moon, Mars, planets at the antisolar region experiencing a non-linear surge of illumination at a very narrow phase angle. When I say phase angle, I'm talking about the right ascension, the east to west angle. So this narrow non-linear surge of illumination is really only explainable how I explain it here, where that area is flooded, where that light is bending around back and it's flooding that area. That's why a full moon looks so much brighter. The surface of the moon looks so much brighter than when it's at first quarter or third quarter. Now the heliocentrists will say, well, that's the opposition surge is happening because, well, there's certain, there's pits and valleys to planets and they create shadows. And so when the sun is illuminating that planet straight on, it's hiding the shadows basically. So you're getting more sunlight. Well, gee, that's not the case. What about when we look at the Earth from the Himawari satellite, which is actually operating inside the Earth? It's not at 22,000 miles away. It's at the actual. It's at an equilibrium zone about halfway between the celestial sphere and the Earth, and we're actually looking at the concavity of the Earth. But what about the illumination there? Or let's take whether or not that Discover satellite is actually a real satellite. It's not. We're not experiencing this opposition surge. So it's a cop-out answer. It's a cop-out answer that they just fail to want to look extensively at and realize that they're actually in a state of denial. They're in a state of denial when they say that it's just a happy coincidence that the sun and the moon appear to be the same size in the sky. What do you think the chances are of that happening with this vast, endless...
It's just impossible.
...heliocentric universe? Yeah, with billions of light years. It's impossible. But they'll just say it's by a freak happy coincidence. That the sun is just magically 400 times farther away than the moon, and it's 400 times bigger. And that's not, it's much more reasonable. See, I'm really liking to use the word reasonable lately. It's much more reasonable to believe that the sun and the moon are physically virtually the same size. And there's varying fluctuation because they're behind glass. I believe there's actually a negative refraction happening with the glass that surrounds the moon. And I believe that it also reverses the apogee and the perigee, meaning that when the moon is physically closer to the Earth, it actually appears a little bit smaller. And so it's an opposite effect. It's another way to trip up or trick mankind. But the moon, they will tell you, it appears flatter. It's not a perfect sphere. Well, that's because you're viewing it behind this negative refractive glass. So these small little details, small little anomalies give it away. But it's much more reasonable to believe that the sun and the moon are the same size, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I mentioned before, it's a good possibility. There's a guy named Dave Lapointe who made these videos about primer fields where there's these two bowls and they're opposite each other and they create this little surge of plasma in the center of it. But inside the bowls, he calls it these confinement domes. And so these confinement domes are obviously the shape of half spheres, actually a little bit more than half spheres. And so that's how I believe that the moon and the sun were actually formulated at the beginning, inside the center of the octahedron. And so somehow, once they were formed, they shot up. One shot up north, one shot up south, out of the octahedron, and they began to orbit around the celestial sphere. And so we have the beautiful workings. This is just like a beautiful watch. Everything is synchronized. Everything is predictable because it's all closed. It's all perfectly knit together and operable in that way. The heliocentrist will say that the Earth wobbles. They call it the Chandler wobble. Well, it's much more reasonable to believe that a much smaller object, the celestial sphere, is slightly wobbling as opposed to a spinning Earth that's wobbling. So there's a slight little, very, very tiny wobble to the celestial sphere. They say it's due to the sun and the moon, the lunisolar precession, I believe. And so there's this, when the sun and the moon are orbiting inside like that, they're creating pressure pockets. They're relieving pressure in one area and giving more pressure in other areas. And so it's gonna very slightly jar that celestial sphere to wobble very slightly. And that's also how we get the tides too, via the pressure. As the moon and the sun orbit inside the glass that's at 100 kilometers high, it's slightly magnetic because there's actually iron. If you look into the Libyan desert glass, how they analyzed the Libyan desert glass, they found iron, they found magnetite. So this glass sky is actually slightly magnetic, and the moon is slightly magnetic as well. They call it paramagnetic as opposed to ferromagnetic. Paramagnetic, there's going to be a slight magnetic effect to it. And so as the moon orbits around, it's relieving pressure as it pulls the glass sky toward itself, and as it causes it to lower on the opposite side. And so it's creating the tides that way. We're in this pressurized system. Everything is working beautifully pressurized. There's an equilibrium state. And so we have constant orbit. We have constant motion of the celestial bodies. There's also magnetism in play as well. I believe that's how the satellites, or the moons, the natural satellites of planets like Jupiter and Saturn, orbit their respective planets. There's a magnetic pull that's attracting them. I believe that these planets are the 7 vials of the Book of Revelation. That when the sun stops, that whatever's inside of these planets is going to be poured out upon the Earth, and it's going to, it's not going to look pretty, basically.
Yeah, they're like balls described in Revelation.
Yeah, some versions, Bible versions, call them bowls. Some call them vials. But they are containers, and it's most likely that at least Jupiter, Mars, Uranus, Neptune are probably glass balls with liquid inside, because you see the stripes of Jupiter, and we see these cloud formations happening as a result of its spinning. But if you understand how, if you're spinning something, you're spinning a ball with liquid inside, or you're spinning a bucket around, that liquid is going to adhere to the concave edge of the planet, and it's going to create, if you watch that video where I show the fluid dynamics, we pouring the dye into the rotating tub of water, and then you agitate that water and you spin it, it's going to create those long filamentary streaks, how we see the cloud formations happening on Jupiter. And so there's probably some kind of liquid inside these planets that are going to be poured out when the sun stops. And I believe that these moons that are orbiting these planets are going to be used as ways in which to break open, or to crash into the planets and open up the vials. So it has an eschatologic function. That's what people fail to understand. It's not there for decoration, but it actually has function, it has purpose. It's kind of, it's kind of a dark omen if you think about it. This planet is just looming over our head, waiting to be poured out upon the Earth. So you have functionality. There's so much functionality going on here. We have the Milky Way band. You see the Milky Way band there, cocked at 60 degrees. The Milky Way band has a functionality. If you look at cosmic microwave background radiation, or the Planck data, you will see it's a perfect straight line, that Milky Way band. So that divides the celestial sphere in two. It's a perfect cutaway. It cuts it right in half. I actually believe during the time of the flood that Milky Way band was perfectly horizontal. It was going right across the celestial equator, but somehow it got cocked like that. But now that it's cocked like that, that's how we get the seasons. That's how we get the northern and the southern declination of the sun. It's being governed by the Milky Way, by the band. The sun can only go so far north and so far south before the band actually causes it to go the other way, because there are opposing currents, magnetic currents, in that celestial sphere, depending on which hemisphere you're in. And so obviously the sun's going to cross that band 2 times every year. Right now it's crossing the winter solstice in December, and the current in that hemisphere now is causing the sun to rise northward. So it gets to a point, and it also speeds up too. When it's going across the band, I call it, there's viscosity, which means that it's slowing it down. And that's why the sun actually has an actual varying velocity. The heliocentrists will say, no. The sun is stationary and the earth is spinning and it's tilted, and the equatorial inclination is causing us to think that the sun is actually slowing down and speeding up in the sky, as well as the earth orbiting in an elliptical orbit around the sun. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, if you watch my analemma video, I explain, well, that's, even the astronomer royal said that's not happening. It's not going to cause, your equatorial locations, it's not going to cause the apparent slowing down and speeding up of the sun. And so in my model here, you understand that there is an actual literal slowing down and a literal speeding up of the sun, as the back of the sun, the rays that connect to the sun, are going through the Milky Way band twice a year, and they're getting slowed. There's viscosity there. It's slowing the sun down. So the sun is it's connected. It's connected to the top of the octahedron. It's a circuit. It's anode to cathode. And so we have real variant velocity of the sun, and that's what creates the analemma. If you take a picture of the sun at the same time every day in the sky, over the course of 1 year, it's going to create a figure 8, with the southern side being much fatter. And that's because the sun actually physically gets a little bit closer to the earth in the southern hemisphere. And that kind of loosens the velocity of the sun. It makes it much slower and much faster, as opposed to the north. And so it's creating like a fat figure 8, basically. The moon has an analemma as well, but the moon's analemma is done once every lunar month, as opposed to once every year for the sun. Because the moon is going to complete, an oscillation circuit every lunar month, going from its highest point, its highest declination north, to its highest declination south and back again. And so that's why we can pick up a lunar analemma as well. But they're all behind glass. Just how you see atmospheric effects and anomalies happening through a telescope when you look at the moon, or when you look at stars. Sometimes it looks like you're looking at like a water caustic surface happening in front of the moon or in front of the stars. Well, you're looking at it through glass, at least, and we know that there's ice attached to the glass. So there's water above, and obviously there's water inside the celestial sphere as well. And so we have this working universe all inside the earth. It's kind of ironic, It's just so opposite in extremity of what we're taught and what we're told in school.
Yeah.
Years, Everything is small and tiny and close to us. But that's what happens when your foundations are not right. And it's a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of how intelligent or how much knowledge you possess or how much disinformation that you study or how much indoctrination that you have. It's a matter of the heart. And as I said before, heaven is where the heart is. And the octahedral structure is a prime platonic solid that represents the heart. Heaven is where the heart is. It's right there. So if you have that foundational understanding, that heart sense, everything makes sense. Stars are products of multi-bubble sonoluminescence, very tiny. We have interplanetary we have bipolar nebula. They call it bipolar planetary nebula. It's not planetary, but that nebula is symmetrical, and it's all aligning the Milky Way band. So we have functionality here, and it works perfectly. All the issues are resolved. All the questions, the questions that the heliocentrists cannot answer. Where do mega-cry meteors come from? Well, you're denying the obvious that a child can understand when he looks at a rainbow, that there's glass in the sky. And there's a ceiling to the sky. And there's ice attached to this glass. It's transparent. And obviously you got to realize that there's people in the know in higher places that know this, but have no incentive to tell you. But also who tacitly know that I'm the individual who is given the right to tell you. It's my right to tell you this. So they're just waiting for me to come of age, basically. It's just a matter of time. And so for those who have been following Flat Earth, you had to have experienced major cognitive dissonance by not being able to resolve the impossibilities that I presented over in the past. And so I say to you, this is the reason why you adopted Flat Earth in the first place, because it's a gateway to understanding the truth. It's a stepping stone to understanding the true shape of the Earth. There is curvature, but since light bends up, you don't really detect it that well. So when you say, show me the curvature, I say, show me your intelligence. Show me your intuition. Show me that you cannot get fooled again. Because I have no burden other than just to tell it like it is. Tell the truth. I sleep well. I have cognitive harmony. And I think you do too. I mean, it's just, you guys who follow me know my model. I mean, there's nothing that is not resolved in your psyche and your understanding of things. So you have peace.
Yes. You're right, Lord.
Yeah.
Everything is just perfect at the surface when you know that it's concave and how works everything in there. Like there's so much harmonics in everywhere. It's just just divine divine creation. And when people say like God created like flat Earth with a this dome shaped like like when you're getting room service, it's basically that. So what I'm trying to say, I think it's a direct insult to God that He only could create like this shape of the Earth. It's more
Yeah.
It's more to it.
Yeah. God is smarter than Flat Earth. Come on.
Yeah, indeed.
It's a little bit more. I mean, there are really no flat objects in nature. So that's, I think we're making progress, though. I think with my work and your help and other people who follow me, their help as well, they're helping flat earthers see the light and make that next step. I think also other people too, other heliocentrists like Tim Osman and PMARs who are going into hangouts and just challenging these flat earthers, and they're beginning to see the fallacy of flat earth, and so they're faced with a choice. Are you going to go back to a fictitious spinning ball, or are you going to come to the truth? And
It's just a matter of time when everyone will know that the Earth is concave.
yes, it will be. It has to be. I mean, it's
like it was prophesied that the knowledge of the Lord will be full as water covers the seas.
Yes. Yes, I believe that. The knowledge of me will be filled. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of me as the waters cover the sea.
Yes.
Filled. We have a container. Earth is filled with the knowledge of the Lord. So exciting times ahead. Like I say, I expect things. I cannot make predictions. I made predictions in the past, but mostly those predictions were based on my expectations. And so when my expectations are not met, it's not really my fault. It's the powers that be that are not relinquishing their power to me. And so I'm expecting. I've given you guys enough time. I've been waiting long enough. It looks like signs in the heavens are happening September 23rd. So to me, that's a good date. I was released from prison on that date. I was released from probation on that date. And I think it's a good date for me to be announced,
yes,
to be
indeed.
released from obscurity. So I'm expecting that. I cannot guarantee it's going to happen, but that's my expectation. And this world is really in need of me to take over. A lot of things have to get straightened out. A lot of corruption needs to be taken care of. Corruption in the Vatican, corruption in governmental powers, corruption in commerce, you name it. It's got to be taken. It's got to be dealt with, because I am the Lord, and this is my earth, and I own the earth and the people that dwell therein. And so it's a matter of, obviously, it's a matter of me in this incarnation of coming of age, coming of maturity. I'm 50 now. My biological father passed away, and I think I'm ready to father the world. It's time for me to step up, I believe. So that's my expectation, anyway.
I'm looking forward for that day, and I think everyone who follows you are looking to that day, because it was it's time for you to be acknowledged by everyone, because everyone forgot God and is mocking, and the science, like scientists saying that we're living in this vast universe without no purpose, and evolution happened, and so on and so on. There's so much lies that has to be how should I say, cleansed or
cleansed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really it's pretty sad. I'm reading a comment right now by somebody who professes to be a Christian. I just uploaded a video about that Mario guy from Vigilant Christian.
Yeah, I've seen it.
He's claiming that he led tens of thousands of people to Christ. Well, I don't know these people. You led these people to Christ. I don't know who you're talking about, dude. Well, there's a verse in Scripture in Matthew 7. It says, people will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, we performed all these miracles. We healed the sick. We went to, we had a prison ministry. We did all this stuff. And I will say to you, depart from me, worker of iniquity. I never knew you. And so these people, and I got to come here saying, from this guy, John Miller, he calls himself a Christian. He's saying, at least he doesn't He's talking about Mario here. At least he doesn't deceive people like you do. Repent now, Stephen Christopher, before it's too late, and you and your cult followers are thrown into the lake of fire. Repent as soon as possible. So what we're experiencing here is just this mass deception, this collective delusion of these people who take a book, who read something out of a book, and idolize it. It's gospel. Okay, it's whatever it's recorded, whatever written in that book, even though it's been filtered through the hands of men, through the hands of corrupt and deceitful men working in the Vatican, they're still going to believe every word, even though they're not words, because words are audible sounds, right?
Yes.
Words are not textual characters that come out of a book. But since they want to believe that those are not only words, but the Word of God, the inerrant Word of God, without any error, they are committing idolatry. And so they have an obstruction in their heart. You know, the eyes of their hearts are blinded by this. They're committing the same old sin of the Pharisees that they committed in Jesus' day. You know, the spirit of religiosity. It's not their hearts. Their hearts are not soft to realize or to understand that I'm living, that I'm breathing, that my words are powerful. They're coming out of my mouth. They're not dead, static text that you read in a corrupt book or a semi-corrupt book. You know, you can still use the Bible for good reference points. And a lot of it is inspired, but those are not words. Those are not living words. What you're hearing right now are living words. And so that's the difference. You're not idolizing a book. You're researching, you're utilizing it for reference. You know, you're gleaning things out of this, but you're not worshiping the book and praying to an imaginary, transparent, not there vacuous God. And really what you're doing, you're just hiding that you're masking your own ego by claiming to know this fictitious Jesus in the sky. You know, your magic sky god. And so that's what they're guilty of. And that's how, you know, I made a video about the guillotines. And these people who hang on or cling on to this imaginary concept of their God, they're going to have to be beheaded. And because they just fail to have their hearts recognize me for who I am. I'm here. I'm with humanity. I'm integrated with humanity. I'm here to set up my kingdom. And you have to realize that at this current time, I'm not all powerful. But I believe I will have power and authority to rule again my world. And so that's why there's corruption. That's why there's disease and sickness and fighting and everything, because I'm not in power yet. And so they have to realize that. They have to realize that there's scripture, that it's corrupt. Parts of it are corrupt, not all of it, but where it says that in Matthew 24, that where it says that see to it that no man call himself Christ, for Christ shall return as the heavens, as the east, as the lightning shines from the east to the west in the heavens. Well, how do you know that that verse was not actually forged in by the papacy, possibly? You know, it did filter through the Vatican, and maybe they were a little bit concerned that they didn't want their power leaving the system, the papacy. They didn't want some guy out in the field becoming popular, maybe, and you know, so they wanted to control the masses. So I think it's a good possibility. And you know, understanding reincarnation is true. You know, that's the whole concept about being born again. If you read John chapter 3, you understand that when it says that no man can enter the kingdom of God unless he is born again, that time frame, that generation, the kingdom was not going to be set up. So you would have to be born again into the future in order to enter the kingdom of God. Born again is being reincarnated. It is not having this renewed so-called spirit and give me your life to Christ. But it's been studied over and over again. All these so-called Christians who claim to be born again, they resort back to the same old sins as before. It's just masked in hypocrisy and pretense. They're just as filthy as before. I mean, they'll put on a good face, and they'll go to church and smile a lot, and they will suppress their anger emotions. They'll do a lot. But you just got to be real, dudes. It's not working. It's not what it is to be born again. You're not born again in that way. You're not born of the Spirit in that way. Reincarnation has to do with being born of the Spirit, because your spirit travels from one body to the next body. So that's what it means. So here we are.
Amazing. Like, I didn't know about this moon things that will break those containers. It just blew my mind. I was always thinking why those moons are there. What is their purpose? If the planets are like those containers with the judgment. And so why there's those moons there? But now I understand, and everything is like fits perfectly. This domino effect, if you can call it like that.
Yeah. I mean, and you got to realize. I mean, I don't really understand why people just have. I think they intentionally have this mental block. Because when you easily explain this to people, there's deep underground military bases. That there's tunnels connecting cities and countries, and there seems to be a convergence area under Australia and Pine Gap. They're spraying the skies with chemicals that retain heat. You put two and two together, you look at my model, it's not that hard to figure out. There's a glass sky, there's ice attached to it. Earth is stationary, the sun stopped in the past, it's going to stop again, and all that ice is going to be falling down, and it already is falling down to give you even more signs and more confirmation that is happening. Megacrymeters are falling here and there, but these truthers are refusing to question it, because why? There is no other reasonable explanation to their origin than my model with the glass sky. It's very simple. And so there's this denial mechanism in their brain, or they have the incentive to be attempting to make money or fame or popularity. My model is too crazy. You're going to lose views. You're going to do what? I mean, is that what it's all about? Your quest for truth? Popularity? You're not on the right road to truth if you're seeking popularity. I'm seeking popularity, but I am the truth. So you have to align yourself with me. And so to me, it's like, what's wrong with these people?
Yeah.
Look at the omens. The omens of the ice blocks. Tunguska. John Connors in Chicago in his apartment building. Bam. Right through his living room. The Soul car dealership. Fiat, what's it called? A Kia Soul. Bam. Right through the front windshield onto the driver's seat. I mean, how many more blocks of ice need to fall before you start, not you, but before the masses start taking me seriously?
Yeah.
I think we need a few more ice blocks to fall. I mean, it's I don't want this to be a big surprise to everybody, obviously, because it's going to kill a lot of people. So we need a few more signs, I think. So we'll see what happens in the near future. But if you don't have enough mental capacity, cognition to put two and two together and look at the signs, I mean, you got to realize how much indoctrination that, and how much disinformation, and how much people want to feel accepted by the masses. So there's a inclination there to conform to the standard scientific theory, scientific heliocentric model, because you don't want to be made fool of or ridiculed, because these people appear very intelligent. But you're not spinning. You're not spinning. The atmosphere is not spinning in sync with the Earth. Completely two different densities going on there. Look at fluid dynamics, how I show you. On a non-rotating tub of water, you're going to get those phi ratio spirals of the cloud formations only if it's not rotating. And that's what we see with the hurricane formations. You're not rotating, dudes.
Yes, indeed. I mean, you just have to like have this common sense, use your logic.
Makes sense.
There's no spin. You don't feel any spin.
The problem with people, man has the ability, he has a latent potential mentally to acquire a huge capacity of intellect or knowledge. And so his drive or his quest is to pursue that. And so when he sees his peers or colleagues, or when he gets rewarded through grades in school or through scholarship or through job promotion, to attain that level of epistemology, that incentive blinds them. That incentive, that quest for acknowledgement by peers, it blinds them from their true visceral instincts, their common sense instincts. So they're affected by this lateral peer pressure. And that shows me that they don't have themselves enough integrity to stand up on their own, of what they truly believe. So they have to deny. Deny is a big word. Denial. They have to deny a lot of what is going on in their inside, their intuition. There's a block with their intuition. And that manifests in ways of stress, hypertension or headaches. That's going to be exhibited because there's this denial mechanism that you are refusing. You're denying yourself truth because of your quest to feel important, to feel notoriety, to get your colleagues to praise you. Wow, this guy, his pursuit. It's all about rewards. It's a sociological issue, really. I mean, humans are they're incentive. They're motivated by rewards of how other humans will view them, instead of just looking at the truth. It's sad.
Yeah, it's really sad.
I mean, look at you. You're going out into the public. You're telling everybody, wherever you go, the grocery store, your work, your job.
Yes. I mean, I'm this person that I don't want anyone harm, and I just want to warn them, because it's not a joke. And if I have to take this mockery, I will. If it takes for them to realize that I could take this mockery, I don't care if it saves their life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't. Mockery is nothing. I mean, it's you're above that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like you don't realize it's just the concept of when Jesus was suffering. It said, "Forgive them, Father; they know not what they do." And so you view them as ignorant children in that respect. And so, yeah, go ahead, mock, whatever. The sky is still going to fall. And you could say, "Oh yeah, well, we've been given that doomsday scenario over and over in the past." Yeah, but have you applied Lord Stephen Christ's accurate model of the Earth, where he shows there's actually really a glass sky, and we actually have large chunks of ice falling down? And how come you're not talking about that? Yeah, well, whatever. And
Yeah.
It's a matter of applying reasonable logic and looking at the situation, looking at the signs, looking at how the powers that be are preparing themselves for a doomsday event. They're not only preparing physically with shelters, with spraying the skies with preventative maintenance, but they're preparing the conditioning of the masses by false flags, by staging events, in order to quell the crowd, the hysteria that has the potential. So they're also trying to eliminate guns from society, because when this stuff hits the fan, you're gonna have Southern dissidents with their guns gonna be shooting off out them. Gonna be shooting off out at them. Tanks in the street? Hell no! You ain't coming to my house. But it's all a matter of understanding the greater potential danger we're talking about. I mean, we have people like Infinite Plane Society has no clue of the whole situation. He thinks that global warming is a hoax. You just look at common sense tells you that the exponential acceleration or rise in population has increased so much lately. And you look at every metropolitan area within the earth. Look how much heat emissions that are happening in those metropolitan areas. Look how many factories, look how many car manufacturers, look how many industries are just generating this carbon footprint, whatever you're going to call it, but that is going somewhere. That's rising. And there is a glass sky with ice attached to it. And so, yeah, there's going to be studies that will deny it, because those studies and companies that have been even found to be very fraudulent and be very partial and biased in their denial of climate change, like Exxon. These oil companies, they would have a lot to lose if they were to actually acknowledge that the atmosphere is warming up. Common sense tells you it's warming up.
Yeah.
And look at the signs. They're trying to suppress the heat, but they realize the ice is gonna fall regardless. And for one thing, you don't have much common sense if you think the Earth is flat. And another, if you can't even look at the signs and realize what is going on in the world, you don't have a clue. You don't have a clue as to your suppression or denial of a real heaven with a real creator and a real Christ that is actually engaged with society. You don't have a clue about the fact that the sun is orbiting inside and will stop before in the past. You don't have any eschatology. All you have is your filtered, skewed understanding via your skewed research, your biased research into areas that you felt were somehow pandering to your need to generate some kind of profit, to be some kind of profiteer, to be some kind of parasite that latches onto an already established movement of gullible people, which the Flat Earth collective delusion does. And so you don't have any interest but your own self, your own warped sense of understanding how to manipulate people for your own profit. You don't have the heart sense or the love for people, and realizing that God, I created people out of love and out of wanting to save them and preserve them, even though I get really pissed at them sometimes. But just as a parent disciplines a child, so I too. I can get pretty mad sometimes at people, and I have. But it's all in the understanding that I still love them. I still want to teach them the truth about the earth, about what's going to happen, and just realizing that you need to realize that this kingdom of God that I talk about is not a fictitious construct or concept. It's not a transcendental concept or construct. It's an imminent, in the flesh construct that will take place in earth, just like the Lord's Prayer says. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. So this is a real governing imminent kingdom that I talk about. Listen to me, people. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see if you have anything else to say. I'm pretty much talked out for this evening.